I tell you most solemnly, before Abraham ever was, I am. And in the translation that we have here, they have deliberately put I am with a capital letter for the am, indicating that it is quite explicit in its reference to the divine name. The first person singular of to be is Echye in Hebrew, and the Yahweh, which anglicized becomes Jehovah, comes from that verb, essential being, the one who is, and yet cannot be pinned down. I am who I am, but it's also in the ongoing indefinite form. I am, but I will be what I will be. There's a mystery about it. We are what in philosophy is called contingent being. Here we have essential being, the only one that ever was and cannot but be. Being is the essence of his being. And we forget that actually, if we can imagine before all time, nothing was but him. And therefore even the angels are the fruit of a brainwave. And of course the demon is one of them. But so are we, in the sense that we are called to take his place, and therefore that horrible jealousy and envy that he has for the human soul, he can't bear it, that we should have those thrones that he has lost. And his interest is to get as many as he possibly can down to where he is, increasing his reign and authority. But I want to zoom into this question of tasting death. It's quite mysterious. Whoever keeps my word will never know the taste of death. As it happens, only last night, while confessing many little children in Johnstown, there were 2 sessions, each one at least an hour long, and they were well prepared, and it was a pleasure and a joy, a pastoral joy, to bring these lovely innocent children to Jesus in that sacrament for the first time. There were 3 priests, Father Michael, and then Father Ray from the nearby Dalgan, and afterwards we had a little word of priestly fellowship, and he shared, Father Ray, this that had happened, which in itself was quite shocking, the death of his father. Somebody saw that there was smoke coming out of the bedroom where the father was asleep. They woke the mother and indicated there was smoke coming out there, and it seemed to be a fire. So they tried to get up there, but the door by then could not be opened, and he was aware of what was going on at that stage, but couldn't get out. And so all they could do eventually was call the powers that be, the fire brigade, but time was going all the time, and he was in this conflagration and getting burnt. Eventually they managed to force down the door, but the state he was in was something else. He was rushed into hospital and lasted about a fortnight. Terrible state, pain. At the time, Father Ray, being a missionary, was actually a young priest, and he hadn't been long away from home, because it was only 2 months before that he'd said goodbye to his parents in joy, in the freshness of his youth, going to minister to the Lord down there in the Philippines. He came back immediately, and he wasn't sure whether he was going to get back in time before his father's death, given his situation. But the Lord kept his father alive for that. And they had this little conversation in the terrible pain of the last moments of his father. His father, being a holy man, like his mother, by the way, what I could make out listening calmly to what he was saying, was indicating to his son that this was not put his faith to the proof. The Lord had given his mission, and it wasn't to affect it in the slightest. He was to go on and move on, and not in any way let this upset his relationship with God, which could easily do, and it does quite often when there's tragedy in the family. And he was obviously quite special as a soul. And then something happened which was quite puzzling. He was still lucid, and he spoke, "The Blessed Virgin is here." He was opening his eyes and he could see. And he was saying to his son, the priest, that he was going home. And the lesson, of course, was that, therefore, the question of tasting death wasn't what we think it is. He was going into life, crossing a bridge. And a few seconds later, he was in a coma from which he didn't wake on this side of time. But we can be calm and sure that the eyes opened into bliss fairly quickly on the other, given that he was going through the fire of a purgatory in his body on earth. And this was the conversation that we had last night over a cup of tea, and it was very consoling, because it was just the tip of the iceberg as regards the massive hidden holiness that was in the island in which you grew up, because it was all around. People weren't glorified, but they had that deep faith. Indeed, I may have told you before, that when we were burying Pat Cullen a year or two ago, something happened there. We, who had been preparing him for death, were aware that he wanted to go to Jesus. And then, when it came to keeping vigil, I wasn't there myself, but I heard this directly the following day from Father John. His body was in the church, and Father John was saying a breviary in his house, Compline, and he heard in his heart a voice saying, "Go to church." Because it was objective and not coming from himself, he listened and went, checked the coffin with Pat in it was there. The church actually was open for adoration, but anyone in adoration would be in the chapel there where you know, but there was nothing strange, so we thought he must have been having some kind of illusion. So anyway, he went back, or started to go back, but just had one afterthought, look round, and then he looked all round the church, and it was all starting to happen in the boiler area. It had caught fire, and a few minutes later it would have been an almighty conflagration which would have destroyed the church. So he realised there, and he actually ascribed that to Pat's own intervention. And we know from people like Pat that that was an innovation where heaven and earth was not that far away. There was a thin line of separation from time and eternity, God and man, because the island of old was like that. People weren't in any way living two sectors. And you know that Newman, the great Newman, and he was an Anglican, one of the great intellects of England, Dr. John Newman of Oxford, he was one of the things that puzzled him and actually jolted him about the Roman Catholic Church, which was category B, tiny churches in the middle of nowhere compared to the Anglican glory of England in the 1800s. It was precisely by chance wandering into a celebration in some hidden church where there were ordinary Irish people mainly praying away in their own style. And he saw something he'd never ever seen or imagined before. It was what we're familiar with, people kissing statues, showing affection directly as though they were very much in contact with the real thing that they were aware of as friends and part of the family. And he called it holy familiarity. And it knocked him. Of course the intellectual thing was there as well. It took a while for that to come through, but that bit there was a shock to his system. Here it was not just decorum and performance, it was relationship, naturalness, heaven and earth hand in hand, heaven a part of earth on a daily basis. And we priests can tell you that there's still quite a lot of that around, and in unexpected corners, and actually very unexpected corners. I'm quite surprised actually how God gets into the context of every person. For instance, in travelling people, he uses their language. A lot goes on in that simple faith, e.g. dreams and things which are actually real. It's amazing how God does not distinguish, and it's actually very much looking for that chink in which he can get through, and uses the language and the context that they understand. We must do the same. And the next time we have to do with somebody who is going to taste death, we must ask that question: what is death? It's not the actual act of dying, it's the act of dying without Jesus. That can be real death that never ends.